on the line with us. He's from Azerbaijan Railways. Azad, hello.
Hello. Do you
Hello.
hear me?
Yes, how are you?
Thank you. I hope everybody is fine. Thank you for the giving me the chance to attend such a beautiful event.
You're most welcome. We already heard from our previous speaker from World Bank a little bit more about the corridor running through Georgia and Azerbaijan, and we're hoping that you can tell us more about Azerbaijan in particular.
Yes, thank you very much again for all the previous speakers. It was very interesting to listen, especially for to see our corridor and the interest to our corridor. As you know, we become kind of a single railroad and roadway from Europe to to Asia. So overall interest to our corridor is increased. But what I want to talk about today, of course, maybe cover not only Azerbaijan but also the CIS countries and specifically the CIS countries in the corridor relating to the corridor. In addition to the middle corridor, of course, I want to highlight the importance of the routes going through Middle Asia, like Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, which we connect through our port as well, which also continue the same manner like us and try to develop in the, let's say, same direction. So here, maybe before going to the current situation, just briefly maybe go through our historical development so that everybody will better understand the view and the logic how the railways were developed in the region. So as you know, all these railways that we're talking about, specifically I'm talking about Transcaucasian and Middle Asian region. So we are once upon a time been part of Soviet Union railways, where the big, huge railway was this, part of a centralized economy, was a very planned railway logistics network, and state-owned, of course, mainly, and mostly heavily regulated and state-owned, as I said. So what we inherited from that system. So today's situation, and of course, one very important point that the know-how centers, so-called institutes, the universities for development of the railways were specifically focused in particular areas. So after the collapse of Soviet Union, it was not so much available for all the republics, for all the railroad administrations. So, and this was one of the let's say, source of the problem that we have encountered. So the most important thing about the our history about the railways of the Soviet Union period, that it was heavily utilized. It was heavily utilized and have a very big market share. So the huge amount of cargoes was available, and focus was mainly on operational efficiency rather than market needs, rather than some managerial topics. So here, all this heritage actually passed through most of the railways in the region of the post-Soviet and CIS region. And we, of course, started to encounter some problem. As an integration and during 90s and 2000s, bigger countries with bigger transit volumes, with a longer railway track, and they had an access to these know-how centers like institutes of development, standardization, and all that stuff. They managed to work on their operational efficiency very significantly. And during that period, they managed to integrate and start to pass through big transit amounts and remain this huge amount of volumes that been during the Soviet Union period. But what about the smaller countries? What about the countries of the region I mentioned in Middle Asia and in Transcaucasia? So we started to encounter huge operational problems, and these operational problems reduced significantly our market share. So this market share reduction mainly resulted in less amount to spend on our infrastructure, so that the deterioration and reliability of the services decreased significant level. And this process went through from middle 90s to the middle to the 2010 and something. So during the period when we started to recover, started to doing the steps in order to get rid of all these problems. So here, it's a very important point that I want to mention that there was a kind of, we talk about some threshold under which the railways, the cargo volume threshold, that under which the railways are not in a position to properly maintain its infrastructure. And all the cost for the maintenance of infrastructure they encounter as actually is a smaller portion of the lower chunk of revenue they get. And as a result, as I said, this deterioration and significant and continuous loss of the market. For those bigger countries, they remained over this threshold. So they could generate the revenues that all this inefficiency or all this incompleteness of the system was covered by this excess revenues. And they didn't encounter the bigger problem regarding the infrastructure maintenance. But for us, I'm talking about the countries like Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, and Georgia mainly, we face this significant problem. So what we have today in terms of current situation, we are of course working on in Azerbaijan. We are moving on the development of particular strategies, making specific steps in order to let's say, for example, we are working with international financial institutions who are providing us with technical assistance. We're making specific restructuring in order to in order to make sure that we can inhibit all these changes. For example, we're doing a restructuring. We are making sure that our infrastructure maintenance costs are covered. We're talking about a possible way of SPA, multi-annual SPA contracts that will enable our maintenance costs to be fixed. So in current situation, we started to calculate it. We made the first calculation together with the World Bank support TA. We made a first calculation of our track access. And it's kind of initial calculation so that we will be able to understand what kind of things need to be developed. And the current focus on the problems can be divided into three major areas. First area is internal things that we can do. Second area relates to the governmental support and international framework. And third area, of course, we can talk about mainly the international institutions like OCJD, like all the other regional international railway institutions that can help to develop such a practice and program. So that we're talking about, we can pass to the next slide, please. We can talk about, of course, all these TAC advantages that will help us to get rid of current problems that were encountered. Here, we're talking, of course, mainly our ability to, let's say, build up a proper communication of these integrated related companies between infrastructure, passenger, and cargo services. So in an integrated companies, we're trying to introduce SLA, internal, let's say, SLAs that will enable organization to perceive the infrastructure as a revenue generator. Because a major problem within this let's say, Soviet Union countries, and the logic that actually stops us from moving on that direction is that infrastructure in most of the cases perceived as a support function, and as the companies are integrated, the major focus goes to the cargo, and the traffic management function organization, older organization, mainly focus everything under the cargo. But what we are doing, we are actually separating these functions and making sure that, for example, for Azerbaijan case, we've separated our infrastructure and make sure that maintenance of infrastructure as well as operation of infrastructure are within the same umbrella. On the other side, the cargo and all the cargo operations on the stations are within the, let's say, within the cargo function. So, of course, I'm sure that all the participants are better than me understand the advantages of the track access charge and what it can bring to the corridor. And we're glad that our Georgian colleagues are working closely with the European Union on this. But we are on our side also try to do our best in order to catch up and make sure that we will be able to meet demands that are going to face recently and in short period of time. Next slide, please. So if we briefly talk about internal side of the work we can do in order to maybe facilitate track access charge logic and mind within our countries is, of course, the first thing is regarding the internal managerial structure, internal information system that will provide the more sophisticated cost structure and account separation, as we talked about. So it's the steps that we took inside and working on right now to make sure that we will be able to properly segregate between these, let's say, internal segments of the business. Of course, the structure, as I said, it's important to make sure that infrastructure logic and infrastructure understanding within these railways are changing, because not everywhere there was a big progress and movement from this Soviet system where we have a sun system of the cargo in the middle and everything turns around this. But what we're doing, actually, we're trying to change this logic and make sure that not only our administration, but also the regulating bodies around us try to embrace this understanding. Also, of course, it's very important that in integrated companies, we have to have very detailed SLA, let's say, SLA style internal rules and regulations that explain very in detail what are infrastructure and what are the other departments, like cargo and passenger have to work and how they're going to interactively work with each other and what kind of responsibilities and obligations and right they have toward each other. It's a very important point within the integrated companies, which are not going to unbundle. So together with account separation. Of course, regarding the legal point, I want to mention that legal framework and regulations need to be built up in order to help this process to move on. As it was mentioned previously, shouldn't be done only on the level of one country, but let's say country, because we are working on the same corridor. We're trying to connect all these Middle Asian countries to the Europe, so that there should be a coordination between these countries, not only, as I said, the middle corridor, like Kazakhstan, but also the Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan as well need to be incorporated in that. And another very important point that current, as I said, current TAC includes the maintenance cost, but we have to understand that this maintenance costs are the money, the portion of a smaller, let's say, generated revenue. So this is something that we can spend because we can only spend that amount. So, but in reality, normally it's not enough. And if you look at the standards of maintenance, it means that we should spend more. So our track access charge actually should be more than we can calculate today. And we try to understand how much more. And then when it become very big, it's become not competitive in the region. So it means that we have to talk about the subsidizing with the help of the multi-annual contract for provision of the services of maintenance of the infrastructure. So this also we have developed, and we are now in communication with our government to explain the government that why we need this kind of subsidy and how this actually be a part of track access charge, and how the track access charge can be a tool in the hand of the government to regulate its own economy, to regulate its own market, specifically, of course, logistic market. And the third element of very important steps that can be taken is, of course, the international railway organizations. Still, we believe that international railway organizations can focus on the track access charge more. Today, I think that it's a little bit the importance, or maybe the focus, is undervalued sometimes. And we have observed some attempts of some countries to promote and to start, let's say, use their own track access charge calculation to charge other countries' users, to charge the corridor participants. But because of the older, because of the more conservative views within these organizations, it was blocked. There were some reasons for these blockings. There was some unwillingness to pay more as a result of the new calculation. Some railways don't want to pay more. They're happy with current situation and with current charges, and they don't want to increase their bills. And second point is, as you know, everybody use their own way of calculation. So there's some point where they mistrust each other and say, I want to see your calculation. I want to make sure that what you charge me is actually the thing, and you don't put something there that I don't want to pay for. So this is another point. And of course, the voting mechanisms within this organization, sometimes, as I said, we have observed the situations where all the attempts to put this track access charge on the agenda and make sure that this will be their way of calculation, and this is where how to move on with the next future billing and charging of each other, then it's blocked by voting mechanisms of this organization. So these three elements, I think, brought together can promote significantly the track access charge mind and logic within our geography and help to integrate it to both Asian and European and Western parts, so that we will be one of the, let's say, most competitive and attractive corridors within the region. This is mainly what I wanted to talk about. Thank you for your attention. We'll be glad to answer any question.
Very much. Are there any questions from the audience? No? Nothing so far? Yes, Steven?
Thank you so much, Asad, for your presentation. I really like that you see the track access charging as what it is, the main function between rail operation and infrastructure financing. I totally agree with you that they are a little bit underestimated in our international discussion. Especially, I would like to address your, as you mentioned, you need more maintenance in order to recover your network, and this makes it, as I understood, impossible to calculate track access charges based on your accounting system. So what kind of forecast or estimation do you use then to find the optimal level of maintenance costs and therefore also charges?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. It's a very good question. I want you to imagine that this heavy investment that are brought by the government in order to turn our organization or our country into a logistic hub for the future actually are too big and too large for our organization, because we are only carrying 15 million tons a year, for example. And when we put a 3 billion investment, then the maintenance of this investment need to be somehow, let's say, taken, and it's normally expected that it should be taken by the organization, but it is impossible. So with a small amount of cash we have, we spend about, I don't know, 1/3 of what we need to spend. In order to understand what this should be the proper amount of the maintenance that we need to spend, we actually started a few projects that will help us, like preparing the 10 years maintenance plans with some detailization of, with one German company. We're now working on really calculating for current investment done and current in-use assets that we have, what are the proper amount of, let's say, maintenance costs that we need to spend in order to maintain our infrastructure on a proper level. So that we try to understand, and we understand that this should be, this maintenance cost will be the part of our track access charge, but because of it can be a little bit high, there should be other mechanisms that will help us to reduce it, and the government should participate in this process in order to reduce it. So we are now, of course, make all these financial models current available. For the current available information, we'll try to segregate internally and make account separation and integrate it on our financial models. But of course, the most significant part is to understand what will be the real figure, and considering all this huge investment that came in the last 10 years, and considering the small amount of the cargo that we have, how much money we need in order to maintain this infrastructure. And so this figure will actually show us more proper track access charge, at least fill in this maintenance part of the track access charge more properly, and will create more accurate and more information.
All right. Thank you very much. We have to move on considering time, but thank you very much for this insight. And maybe you just stay with us for a little bit, because we do have a Mentimeter question to make sure that everybody is still awake. This is the QR code, and it actually refers back to the first presentation about harmonized fees on the middle corridor, and that's why I asked Azad to stay. The question is not here yet.